Welcome, everybody. I'm very pleased today to be able to present some of the new findings in the diabetes prevention study called Preview. This study was funded by the European Union to the tune of about $13 million, and it was completed and published in the year 2020. The coordinator of Preview was Professor Anne Rayburn in the University of Copenhagen. So we're going to go to the next page. It's not going. All right, I have a duality of interest to declare, which you can see there on screen, all things to do with the glycemic index of foods. So Preview is a landmark study, one, because it was multinational, and two, because it was the first to use meal replacements for the initial weight loss stage. It was the first to compare two diets and two exercise intensities, and it also went for much longer in terms of weight loss maintenance, 3 years. So the 8 sites in Preview were Copenhagen, Helsinki, Nottingham in the UK, Sofia in Bulgaria, Maastricht University, University of Pamplona, and in the other hemisphere, Sydney and Auckland. So 8 sites altogether. And these were the aims of the Preview project, to find a more effective way to reduce diabetes. So we know from previous diabetes prevention studies that weight loss is extremely important. They aimed for 5% in the DPP, and they aimed, in the Finnish study, and they aimed for 7% weight loss in the diabetes prevention study. Here we aimed for much more. So the aims were also to compare two diets, one being higher in protein, lower carbohydrate, and lower in GI. The other diet being the official, healthy, conventional diet. We also wanted to compare two levels of physical activity, moderate versus intense, and I'll tell you some more about those diets and exercises as we go through the talk. And we wanted to compare weight loss maintenance in a long phase at the end of the first phase of weight loss. We also took this opportunity to ask lots of questions about sleep and stress, and to look at sociological and behavioral factors that might influence weight loss and weight loss maintenance. So in Preview, the inclusion criteria included women and men between a age of 25 and 70 years. So they were younger than in many other diabetes prevention studies. We included people with overweight and obesity. They were screened for pre-diabetes by the ADA criteria, which includes a fasting glucose. You can see the numbers there, or a 120-minute post-glucose load value between 7.8 and 11. They needed to be willing to undertake 7 very full clinical investigation days over the period of the 3-year weight maintenance loss period, including baseline, 8 weeks, all the way through to 3 years. They had to be willing to attend 17 group sessions, and they had to be willing to collect data at regular intervals. And this data include 4-day dietary records, 7-day accelerometry, and 24-hour urine samples. So you can see the burden on the participants was very high. We used a group lifestyle behavioral modification with fading frequency of contact. So it included a phase 1 of weight loss, which was 8 weeks of meal replacements. If they lost at least 8% of their starting body weight, they were eligible to start the weight loss maintenance stage, which went for 34 months and included diet and exercise and behavioral changes. So in this, you can see that there was frequent contact, 4 visits, 4 group visits during the meal replacement phase. It continued during the weight loss maintenance, fortnightly visits, then monthly visits, and then less frequent visits as the time went on through to the 36 months end point. So the phase 1, 8 weeks, was unique for diabetes prevention trials because we used total meal replacements. And these products allow a very fast weight loss because they allow a very low calorie intake of, in this case, 810 calories per day. They were allowed some salad vegetables, which allowed them to eat the main meal of the day with their rest of the family. It allowed for fast weight loss because of the deficit being so large between maintenance, what they needed for weight maintenance and what they needed to lose weight. During this phase, they didn't have to do any exercise whatsoever, something they were very pleased about. And this phase set the scene for the weight loss maintenance phase, which was the target of this study, was to look at weight loss maintenance as a component of diabetes prevention. So phase 2, some more about that. They were randomized to one of 2 diets, and this is the first time that 2 diets have been compared, 2 diets of different composition. The special diet, the one that we were particularly interested in, was the higher protein diet with lower glycemic index carbohydrates. And I'll show you some more about that in a minute. It was 25% of energy as protein was the target, 45% as carbohydrate. Whereas the moderate protein, moderate GI diet, the one that was the conventional diet for weight loss maintenance, was only 15% of energy as protein and 55% of energy as carbohydrate. And of course, the GI was higher. So they were also randomized within each diet to 2 exercise regimes. One was high intensity, and that effectively meant getting their heart rate over 75%, but they needed to only do about 15 minutes a day on 5 days a week for their exercise. The same in terms of VO2 max, the moderate intensity went for at least 60% of maximum heart rate, but for a longer period of time, about 30 minutes on 5 days a week. So I just want to show you what that meant effectively in terms of the intervention groups. So there were 4 intervention groups. And if you look carefully, you can see, I'm hoping you can see my mouse there. The first 2 diets were moderate protein. And you can see there's a smaller amount of the protein in there and a larger amount of carbohydrate. The second 2 diets were higher in protein, and you can see that there's a bigger piece of salmon there. And you can see within each of the high protein groups, you have moderate and high intensity. But what I'm going to show you here is that the names for those 4 interventions were moderate protein and moderate intensity, high protein and moderate intensity, HPMI, then moderate protein with high intensity exercise and high protein with high intensity exercise. So I just want you to note those abbreviations for the 4 interventions because I'm using them in the next slides. So at the end of the weight loss phase, we have an amazing group of people who feel like new people. They are, they've actually achieved weights that they've never been since they were aged in their 20s. So to get this group of people, we were had to screen for at least 15,000 adults. We screened them with the finished risk score. Then we screened them more particularly for their glucose tolerance. So over 5,000 tests, glucose tolerance tests were done. So out of that group, about half, 2,326, were eligible, as is typical. 2/3 were women. The average age was 52, and the average body weight was 100 kilograms. And in terms of BMI, that's 35. So on average, they have obesity. Now, we had a very high rate of completion of this phase. We expected 75%, but it was 79% that achieved at least 8% of weight loss. And in fact, they overachieved. They lost, on average, 11% of their initial body weight. Some of them lost as much as 20% of their body weight within those 8 weeks. And now I want to show you the findings at 3 years. We've got, first of all, the completion rates. We had a high completion rate at 12 months, nearly 75%, or 3 in 4 participants were still part of the study at 12 months. But unfortunately, by 36 months, a study with this degree of burden had just over half of the subjects that were eligible to start the 8-week weight loss phase. The participants who developed diabetes during this 3 years, there were only 62. We actually expected many more. The cumulative incidence of type 2 diabetes was only 3.1%. We expected 13.5% on average would develop diabetes, 10% in the high protein, low GI group, and over 16% in the moderate protein. So we're much lower than we expected. And of course, with so few subjects with diabetes, there were no significant difference between the diets or between the 4 intervention groups, including the exercise groups. And this applied to most outcomes. There was one that was significantly different. I'll tell you about that in a moment. Of course, we don't know the number of cases of type 2 diabetes in the dropouts, but something that we do know is that there was a similar, very low rate of diabetes in all centres, irrespective of the dropout rate. So in many of the centres, we had over 75% completion rate compared to some of the other centres. So we don't think that we missed the cases of diabetes, too many cases of diabetes. So this is your Kaplan-Meier graphic. You can see here, it's not different between the 2 groups of 2 dietary groups, high protein versus moderate protein, for the whole 3-year period. But we have some interesting findings with respect to weight loss maintenance. Although there was no significant difference among the 4 groups, and you can see the 4 intervention groups there, we did have extremely good weight loss maintenance. 1 in 2% maintained a clinically significant 5% weight loss. And in fact, 1 in 4 maintained a 10% weight loss. And this is higher than in other diabetes prevention studies. But of course, there was a group of subjects, about 1 in 5, who actually did worse. They regained the weight they'd lost and some more. And this group is particularly interesting to us, and they're the subject of further studies. This is the difference that was significantly different, the one secondary outcome that was different. We don't think it's by chance. It was highly significant. And what it showed was that the 2 high protein groups, the curve you can see there in orange and red, those 2 groups had fewer participants who achieved normal glucose levels during the weight loss maintenance period. And I think this sounds a little note of caution with respect to high protein diets, that perhaps we need to study them a bit more in terms of diabetes prevention. Fasting glucose rebounded quickly. You can see there that the fasting glucose was the same in all 4 groups at the 36-month time point, and so was HbA1c, and so were all the blood lipids. There were no differences between the diets, exercise groups, or any of the 4 intervention groups. I want to say something about the composition of the diets. At 6 months, we have our best compliance. This is the phase where they're attending group visits most frequently. What we found was that the high protein group did not achieve the 25% that we aimed for. The average was 22%. In the moderate protein group, they ingested more protein than we wanted to, so we were aiming for 15% and we got 19%. The same, we have some reciprocal differences in carbohydrate. Remember, we're aiming for 45% here and we're aiming for 55% carbohydrate in the moderate group. The GI we achieved was comparable to our targets, 51 and 56, but of course we would have liked to see a bigger difference, and the same with glycemic load. And then the differences between the 2 groups are smaller at 12, 24 and 36 months, but still highly significant. So in some ways what we did was overachieve the dietary targets that we were aiming at. So this is showing you the compliance with protein intake. So we've got the 4 intervention groups, the 2, the orange and the red are the high protein groups, the green and the blue are the moderate protein groups. So this is in terms of the urinary output of nitrogen. We can tell whether they achieved what levels of protein they achieved in their diet. And you can see there that all 4 groups went up compared to baseline in terms of protein. So this is a bit of a shame. And by the end of the 36 months, all of them have achieved a higher protein intake compared to baseline. Now I want to show you the longitudinal associations with GI, glycemic index, and glycemic load. This was a secondary pooled observational analysis where we pooled all subjects into one group, and we looked at the 3-year weight loss maintenance, and we looked at 4-day dietary records. So there were 1,280 participants who completed 4 days of dietary records at regular intervals, 6 months, 12, 18, 24, and 36 months. And what we've done is used linear mixed models and repeated measurements to compare the groups in terms of glycemic index and glycemic load that were actually achieved according to the dietary records. So we divided them into tertiles. And this is what you see here. So just look on the left side to begin with. So the group that achieved the lowest glycemic index overall are shown in orange. The group that had the highest glycemic index, the 33% of subjects with the highest, are shown in green. And what you can see on the left is body weight. You can see that as time went on, the highest glycemic index group regained the most weight. The lowest glycemic index tertile achieved the lowest body weight regain. And the same with HbA1c, and the differences are very pronounced. The lowest GI group, tertile, have basically achieved very low levels of HbA1c, something we want to see. So this tells us that these diets, even when they've been adjusted for energy and adjusted for body weight, are still showing differences that are dictated in HbA1c, dictated by the actual GI, the diets. This next graphic shows you glycemic load and body weight changes. And again, the highest tertile have the highest regain of body weight and the highest rebound in HbA1c. So we think that any adverse effects of this diet are because of protein intake rather than in GI. And this last, I'm coming to the end of my presentation. I wanted to show you one recent meta-analysis of observational cohort studies that examine relationships between glycemic index, glycemic load, and the risk of type 2 diabetes in people in the normal population. And what you can see there in those graphics, that for both glycemic index and glycemic load, there is a predictable increase in the risk of diabetes, developing diabetes, as GI and GL increase. And this degree of risk is comparable to exercise, the ability of exercise to reduce the risk of diabetes. So they are substantial food markers, and they apply to people of both European and East Asian origin. And so now I want to sum up what we concluded from the previous study. First, we achieved a remarkable reduction in type 2 diabetes incidence. If we compare it to what we expected, it's a 75% reduction in risk. What are the reasons for such a low incidence? First, these are we think are the possibilities. First, we think it was the large initial weight loss, twice that was achieved in the Finnish diabetes prevention study. We think it was the fact that they were able, many of them, 1 in 2, were being able to sustain that weight loss of at least 5% for the duration of the 3 years. We think some of it is because they increased their protein intake. Both groups increased their protein intake and reduced their carbohydrate intake. So both of those factors might be operating. And lastly, we think it is the lower glycemic index and lower glycemic load, which may facilitate larger reductions in fat mass and HbA1c. So finally, I want to acknowledge the people that, the groups that allowed preview to take place, mostly the European Union, but also the Australian government, the New Zealand government, Cambridge, who provided all the meal replacements for the first weight loss phase, the Glycemic Index Foundation, and the Danish Meat and Research Institute. And finally, in the last slide, you can see all the numbers there for future reference. So thank you very much. I would be happy to answer questions if it was possible, but this presentation will take place in the immediate, in the middle of the night, Australian time. Thank you.